Welcome to another edition of the T3 Raider Roots podcast. I'm your host, T3 Raider Facts. In 1965, President Johnson outlined plans in his State of the Union address in January for a great society, an expanded program of civil rights, anti-poverty, and healthcare legislation. He then turned around the next month and ordered continuous bombing of North Vietnam below the 20th parallel. Race relations in California were tarnished with the outbreak of the Watts riots in Los Angeles during the summer. Much of America needed a break from all the bad news. They'd already begun to find it in football, and they found it in a big way in 1965 when the American Football League added a national television contract to the mix. This was probably the single biggest thing that resulted in ultimate success of the league. So before we even begin to take a look at the results on the field for the Raiders in the year 1965, let's backtrack and take a look at where television was at this point, how the new contract came about, and how it changed not only the landscape of this new league entering its sixth year of existence, but how it changed the landscape of professional football as we know it. Without television, pro football never would have worked its way into becoming the national pastime, supplanting baseball. In the early 1960s, NFL Commissioner Pete Rozelle realized that the quickest and most lucrative way to gain respect, recognition, and establish reverence within the public eye was through the magic of TV. Even as Rozelle was cutting profitable deals with networks, setting in motion the spiraling rights fees that would eventually dwarf everything in TV sports, the AFL was not sitting back on its heels. Lamar Hunt and the other owners were hard at work behind the scenes, making sure that their teams could not only be heard, but be seen as well. In 1965, when NBC got the rights to televise AFL contests, it gave every club sufficient funds to where they could all be profitable from that point on. It truly was a game changer for the league. But before the AFL could get anywhere with NBC, it first did business with the American Broadcasting Corporation, ABC. When the self-proclaimed Foolish Club was putting together its initial plans, pro football on television was kind of the Wild West. Right up until the kickoff of the first game, some of the established teams over in the NFL had their own deals and their own networks. In 1960, when the eight AFL franchises opened for business, 11 of the 13 NFL clubs were affiliated with CBS. The Baltimore Colts and Pittsburgh Steelers had tie-ins with NBC, the first time that network had been involved with televising regular season NFL contests. And NBC had the rights to the NFL title game. So according to Lamar Hunt, that left two options. For the Young American Football League, in Hunt's words, each franchise could form its own regional network or just be televised locally, or the whole league could go national. Hunt, Baron Hilton, Buffalo owner Ralph Wilson, and the other league founders all opted to go national. But where would they go? Well, the answer was as simple as ABC. The new league signed a 5-year television contract with ABC. It became the first ever cooperative television plan for professional football, through which the proceeds of the contract were divided equally among the clubs. ABC and the AFL also introduced moving on-field cameras as opposed to just the fixed midfield cameras used by CBS and the NFL. ABC was the first to have players mic'd up during games. The AFL also had made the decision to put players' names on the backs of the jerseys to make it easier for viewers to identify who was who. With the new television contract, which took effect at the beginning of the 1965 season, NBC paid the AFL $36 million. This intensified the battle over college prospects and suddenly validated the new league. Even though the NFL was more established, it still placed the American Football League on the same plane. As NFL owner Art Rooney stated, at this point, they don't have to call us sir anymore. Sonny Werblin up in New York had purchased the bankrupt New York Titans from Harry Wismer. Werblin was a key figure in helping to negotiate and finally land the big television contract with NBC. He was a talent agent, and a lot of the well-known modern television acts of the time owed their careers to Sonny. Much of the credit of the rapid growth and development of the AFL during this time could also be credited to Werblin. He changed the name of the team to Jets because of the team's close proximity to LaGuardia Airport and a nod to the space age and the jet age. But he also knew that his team and the league could be high flyers, particularly with the outlet of television. In one word, what he brought to professional football was showmanship. The fate of the American Football League was determined in New York City. In 1964, at the height of the World's Fair in New York City, Werblin and his Jets launched the opening of Shea Stadium, the new venue for two professional sports teams, the Jets and baseball's Mets. The neighboring giants of the NFL were near the pinnacle at the time, and they had a little bit of an elitist mentality. Werblin, on the other hand, marketed his Jets for everyone else, the average Joe, if you will. He brought in an orchestra to entertain the crowds, and he had a miniature motorized jet on wheels parading around the infield of the stadium. Crowds thronged and then became the big television deal, which put the NFL or the AFL on equal footing with the rival NFL. About the only thing missing was real star power, that one big fish that would set the New York market and the entire sports world on fire. By the end of the 1964 season, Sonny Werblin had a big check that he wanted to give to a quarterback. He knew that money made news and that big money made big news, and all that would translate to more television dollars, which is where the league was heading. In 1964, Werblin had already gotten a plum when he drafted and signed rookie running back Matt Snell, who had also been drafted by the area rival New York Giants. Snell went on to become Rookie of the Year, and this didn't sit well with the G-men. But even so, Werblin knew that the power of the crowds and the almighty dollar would rest on the shoulders of a star quarterback. Sonny Werblin got his guy in April of 1965 when he signed quarterback Joe Namath, wresting him away from the NFL St. Louis Cardinals and bringing to the Big Apple, to the AFL, to professional football, to millions of viewers on television, and to corporate America what they craved. Now he and the league had that star power. The Jets paid Namath a lot of money, and they knew it. But Werblin knew what he had, and Joe Namath just rolled with it. When the AFL and the NFL began the 1965 season, each with its own national network under contract, the NFL left an opening that the AFL took full advantage of. With the NFL blacking out games in each home market, the afternoon slot was left wide open for the AFL to capitalize on being the only game on television. And that helped the AFL to gain a lot of recognition and a lot of fans. Looking back, TV ratings hadn't been particularly high for the AFL in the first two seasons. However, in 1962 and in 1963, those two championship games would be watershed events that would bring exactly the kind of national acclaim that AFL team owners had wanted. The 1962 title matchup between Dallas and Houston went into double overtime, the longest game in pro football history up to that point. Played just 2 days before Christmas and 1 week before the NFL championship game. The Texans' 20-17 sudden death overtime victory caught the attention of the national sporting world and the entire sporting world. The game included a second half marred by a wicked storm known as a Blue Norther. It also featured a live look-in of the coin toss to start the overtime, one that Dallas star Abner Haynes mistakenly called. The coaches had decided that if they won the toss, instead of receiving, they would defend the end zone with the wind at their back. However, when Haynes won the toss, he said, "We'll kick to the wind." The way the rules go, you can't pick both the choice of receiving or kicking and which goal you will defend. Since Haynes had said, "We'll kick," the other team, Houston, was given the choice of which goal to defend. So they chose to have the wind at their backs. And even though this didn't cost the Texans a victory, it was all caught on camera in real time and explained to the national audience. The public had received a rare and inadvertent look at not only the spectacle of football, but the human side, where mistakes can be made even with good intentions. The following year, 1963, when the San Diego Chargers beat the Boston Patriots 51-10, the game did not have any direct competition from an NFL game. So people watched that game because they simply wanted to see football and had a large audience of people who did not have any previous familiarity with the AFL. The telecast became the subject of water cooler talk and word on the street, and it created a tremendous amount of visibility and memorability. That game had also served to pique the interest of NBC, which was eager to get a bigger share of the football pie. With interest in the NFL surging, Pete Rozelle found himself in a position of unprecedented power. CBS's 2-year contract with the NFL was set to expire at the end of the 1964 season, and both NBC and ABC eagerly joined in the bidding. Rozelle insisted on sealed bids. ABC was so interested in claiming NFL rights that it doubled the previous CBS rights fee of $9.3 million for 2 years. Rozelle then opened the NBC bid, which was 3 times more than what the league previously received. But CBS, considered the top network at the time because of its star power, both in the newsroom with Walter Cronkite and Edward R. Murrow, and in entertainment with such stars as Dick Van Dyke, Lucille Ball, and Ed Sullivan, would not be denied. It was an unfair fight. Rozelle uncorked CBS's bid, which was a whopping $28.2 million for 2 years. It was the biggest ever money deal in sports history, but it was soon to be outdone. Undeterred, Lamar Hunt and the AFL now realized that NBC had money to spend on football and no place to spend it. So when Sonny Werblin entered the picture and brought the swagger of New York City along with it, he helped rapidly broker a deal, $36 million over 5 years. Each of the 8 AFL franchises would get $850,000 a year. This really put the AFL on solid ground because now the owners knew they could go out and sign quality players and compete head-to-head with the established NFL. The TV deal also changed the perception of many of the media who had been negative against the upstart league from the very beginning. Every year prior to 1965, predictions were made that the league would collapse, and the AFL didn't get nearly the kind of coverage and exposure that the NFL did, at least not before 1965. When the big contract was signed and announced, the NFL finally saw that it was in a war with people that could stay in the war. Things had already started to change in 1964, even before the arrival of Namath. NBC, which was recognized in those days as a showcase network, more so than ABC, had popular programs such as The Today Show and The Tonight Show, and legendary stars of its own, Jack Parr, Milton Berle, Johnny Carson, and premier news anchors David Brinkley and Chet Huntley. NBC brought something new to pro football. The Peacock Network, as it was sometimes referred to, began televising some of its games in 1965 in living color. By the next season, color broadcasts would become the norm. Charlie Jones and Curt Gowdy became 2 of the most recognizable voices on AFL telecasts, even though both men served as broadcasters for other sporting events as well, such as baseball and basketball. Gowdy, along with Paul Crispin, always did the AFL's biggest contests, including the title game for ABC from 1962 through 1964. Then for NBC for the remainder of the existence of the American Football League. In 1965, as the new league was finally planting itself firmly within the sports landscape and the homes of millions of Americans coast to coast, it was showing an exciting brand of football. The receiving exploits and talents of San Diego's Lance Allworth, who was known as Bambi because of his speed, quickness, and leaping ability. Oakland's menacing defense, playmaking defensive backs such as Kansas City's Johnny Robinson, ball-hawking linebackers like Bobby Bell and Nick Bonicani, game-breaking runners like Matt Snell, Jim Nance, and Oakland's Clem Daniels, and the men who cleared their paths, Jim Otto, Billy Shaw, and Ron Mix. And a lot of it was in living color. Even the referees wore red stripes instead of the more familiar black and white zebra stripes as they are now recognized. Back in Oakland, Al Davis had predicted the success of football on television. But he was such a brilliant marketer, he knew that when people viewed the Raiders, they would see silver and black, and it didn't matter whether they were watching a color television or not. Al Davis recognized the importance of showcasing other team stars, such as Cookie Gilchrist, Abner Haynes, George Blanda, Lance Allworth, and then, in 1965, Broadway Joe Namath. But he also knew that by forging his Raiders in the tough mold of renegades with an us-against-the-world mentality, he was cultivating something that the sport needed, though it would never say it. The anti-hero, the villain. People love to hate the Raiders. But he came to fear and respect them as well. So people loved the Raiders and hated the Raiders. Al knew this, and he knew it would be good for the league, but only as long as his team kept winning. When the Raiders took the field in 1965, they were looking to get back on the winning track, and the 1965 draft would help them immensely. But the story of how the Raiders did in 1965 is also an intriguing story of just how they did it. In our next episode, we'll look at the Raiders both on the field and behind the scenes. By being beneficiary of the fact that they were on one of only two West Coast teams in the AFL, and with the new television contract, the Raiders would be on TV a lot. Once again, I'd like to give credit to Ken Rappaport in his fine book, The Little League That Could. Michael McCambridge, NFL Films, Steve Travers, Larry Felser, and the contributions from his book, Birth of the New NFL. And special thanks to the late Steve Sable, who put together a multi-part documentary of the American Football League called Full Color Football, which I highly recommend. This is T3 Raider Facts, thanking you for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe to my channel and go back and catch any of the previous episodes you may have missed, and share it with a friend. When you go to my YouTube channel, T3 Sports Guy, click on the playlist where you'll see all the episodes in one place. Until next time, remember, passion always outlives fashion. And here's wishing you a bright silver moon shining in the dark black night.